Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The most dramatic thing that a judge or judges can do in a democracy is to just throw out the results of an election. That's as serious as it gets, right? It's essentially unheard of outside of really rare cases of fraud, right? Otherwise, you don't get to just throw out an election. I mean, the idea of one person or a small handful of people setting aside the will of the citizens, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of citizens, that's pretty alien to our democratic traditions. It just doesn't happen that much. That is what happened in the Commonwealth of Virginia today. Shockingly, appallingly, really. The Supreme Court of that state ruled 4-3 to strike down the congressional redistricting plan that, crucially, had been approved by the state voters in a special election last month, as we covered here at this desk, with millions of people campaigning or showing up at the polls. It won 52 to 48%. Again, weeks of campaigning, millions of dollars spent on ads by both sides, a vigorous public debate, and the people came out, 3 million, to the polls in that Virginia referendum, and a majority of the people said, yes, we want these new maps. And today, a panel of judges, by the narrowest of margins, 4-3, tossed that result out because they say have a technical issue with how that referendum got on the ballot, their interpretation of one word in the state statute. They didn't just block the new congressional map, they vetoed the election. And in so doing, they have also sent the American political system in toto barreling back towards Jim Crow disenfranchisement. As we've been covering closely on the show, as you noted, have been following, they have handed Republicans now a huge victory in the race to the bottom gerrymandering arms race that Trump started to stay in power. Donald Trump is afraid of losing his power in a free and fair election. He's very afraid of being impeached again. He said as much earlier this year, on January 6th, in fact.
You got to win the midterms, because if we don't win the midterms, it's just going to be, they'll find a reason to impeach me. I'll get impeached.
Find a reason? At this point, it's harder to find reasons not to impeach him. And so Donald Trump came up with a plan to rig the midterms, a combination of gerrymandering Democrats out of their House seats in red states. Again, in the middle of the decade, when this is just never done. It's done every 10 years of the census, but screw that, right? They're going to do that and then pass this national bill that would be the most onerous voter suppression law in American history. And he was very clear about this, right? The point wasn't to persuade the median voter, the cross-pressured voter, that they had the best agenda. No, it was these two means to barricade themselves into power. He explicitly said that the point was to engineer races where people can't vote Republicans out of office.
I'll tell you what, Republicans have to win this one. We'll never lose a race. For 50 years, we won't lose a race. We want voter ID. We want proof of citizenship. And we don't want mail-in ballots.
Right? So that's the plan, to change the way voting happens, to change the districts, to basically change the rules of the game rather than actually compete in the game. And while Republicans have yet to pass those voting restrictions into law, though they've tried, they have all, across the country, with some notable exceptions like India and other places, gone all in on Trump's gerrymandering plan. This, I can't stress this enough, this has never happened before, what we're seeing. Never. There was one mid-decade redistricting in Texas under George W. Bush. That was a huge deal. But what we've seen at Trump's direction is that in red state after red state, they have been squeezing out blue districts. And in response to that, Democrats have countered to try to level the playing field, to get things back to par, to get things back to even so that voters can actually decide who should be in Congress. In California and Virginia, Democrats in those states submitted plans for the new maps to the voters. They didn't just ram them through. They said, look, this is our proposal. They went to the voters, and in both states, the voters said, yes. What a novel idea. What a novel idea. Giving the voters a say in all this, in how districts are drawn, how maps are drawn, in who represents them. The voters saying, the voters. Have you heard of them? That's the thing Republicans are trying to destroy. Keep in mind, we already have evolved into a constitutional system that right now, as I speak to you, is deeply structurally biased against one party, the Democrats. It's biased against them in the Senate, where 39 million Californians get the same number of senators as 600,000 people in Wyoming. You ever stop and think, why is there a North and a South Dakota? It's biased against them in the Electoral College, where smaller, more rural states with winner-take-all rules favor Republicans. It is why, if you've been paying attention over the last several decades of American politics, we have had not one, but 2 elections in the past 7 where the Republican candidate won despite getting fewer votes than their opponent. In every other race in the entire country, the person with more votes wins. In every single one except one. Now, in this system that has evolved to be structurally biased towards Republicans, the one place where popular sentiment generally gets transferred most directly is, you guessed it, the House of Representatives. And so now Republicans are trying to electoral collegeify and Jim Crowify the House. So the Democrats need to win by 2 or 4 or 6 points nationally just to get the same number of seats as Republicans, to open up the possibility of an election like 2000 or 2016 in which more people vote for Democrats, but Republicans still maintain the majority. That is an unbelievably dangerous situation, right? It's the potential difference between a do-nothing Congress that continues to bow to an aspiring king and a truly representative body that restores some semblance of sanity and accountability. But deeper than that, it's the difference between us having a democracy or not. And yet, despite all this, Virginia's Supreme Court reinforced that Republican advantage today. Again, they vetoed the voters. You don't see it that much. You don't see courts just go like that to an election that much. No to 1.6 million voters in their state. No to a last-ditch attempt at parity, fairness, and justice. Now, the court's majority was wrong. I think they were actually wrong on the technical meaning of the law. If you read their opinion in the dissent has a better part of it. But this is part of an insane asymmetry between how democratically controlled states and Republican controlled states have been treating this redistricting arms race that Donald Trump started, right? On one side, Democrats are going through procedure after procedure, right? They got initiatives, they changed the maps, then they got initiatives on the ballots, then they had to run a campaign, then they had to go to the voters, and they had to pass the new maps. On the other side, as Semaphore puts it, Republicans are simply not limited by so many small d democratic restrictions. They just convene their legislatures, which themselves, by the way, are highly gerrymandered to begin with, that have these like insane 80-20 majorities. And then that gerrymandered state legislature rams through a new gerrymandered congressional map. Like in Tennessee, where Republicans yesterday took the state's last majority minority district in Memphis, a congressional district that has existed since 1923, because obviously there's a district that represents one of the largest cities in the state, and cracked it into pieces in order to give Republicans every House seat in the state. They did this while hundreds of people protested outside.
People have died to be able to have representation, and they are stealing it. They are changing the laws mid-game and trying to take away the voice of people, and these voices matter.
It's illegal, and it just shows you how hell-bent they are on taking away the black voice in Memphis.
Oh, they're not done. No, they're not done. They did it in Alabama today, too. They kept get this. They kept the state house open through a tornado evacuation, okay? The state was being evacuated because there was a tornado. There were leaks happening in the building. This is a state that's got its fair share of problems. It ranks near the bottom in a whole host of things. But no, they stuck to their guns. You hear that siren in the background. And in a building being evacuated, they got together to approve a map that eliminates one of the 2 majority black districts.
It really just hurts me and it just disturbs me that we're at this point in 2026, an entirely new century, and then we're still arguing over who has the right to have rights.
Then, of course, there's Louisiana. Last week, the Supreme Court basically killed off what was left of the Voting Rights Act. It gave that state's Republicans carte blanche to draw a new map. Now, that election, the primary election, had already started. 40,000 people had already voted. The governor declared a state of emergency. He declared a state of emergency because he didn't like what was happening in the vote. Today, the state legislature opened public hearings to consider maps that would just happen to eliminate one or both of Louisiana's majority black districts. You get the pattern here, right? One after another, so that there's no black members of Congress left in the states of the old Confederacy. One state senator called them out on it while hearing testimony from the only 4 black people to represent the state in the House since Reconstruction.
We have over 4.4 million people in the state. A third are African American. This is a former slave state. Since the end of slavery, these 4 gentlemen have represented us in Congress. That's it. And now we want to reduce that. My public comment is anger. This upsets me. How do we not focus on race?
Think about that, right? It's the blackest part of the whole country, states of the Old South, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina. You see the trend. Donald Trump's plan isn't to win over voters. It's to win elections in perpetuity by blocking voters' ability to have a say. Choosing your voters, moving them around like pieces on a board instead of letting them choose you. And it only works if Republicans can systematically disenfranchise black voters in the American South. They want a new Jim Crow. They're very explicit about it. They're hard at work trying to make it happen, and now they have a blessing from the Supreme Court.